6 of 57, just before he died, and he was working on some preliminary drawings for Sleeping Beauty. And Walt's desire for this particular section was to see it like a spectacle on a stage. Not too literally said, but he wanted by the mystical quality of the Ave Maria drawings. Here we have Kai Nielsen's design again. Kai Nielsen happened to come to the Disney studio at this particular time because he was in rather dire straits. Nielsen later created murals while in this country, but his era of making elaborately illustrated books had passed, and so he had a very difficult time making a living here, and in fact he died destitute. He worked one more time, briefly, for the Disney studio, and that was, I think, around 56 or 57, just before he died, and he was working on some preliminary drawings for Sleeping Beauty. And Walt's desire for this particular section was to see it like a spectacle on a stage. Not too literally said, but he wanted a bigness to it, and it always seemed to me like the Easter pageant at Radio City Music Hall. It has that sort of big stage quality to it. The procession of the faithful and the nuns through the forest, which it looks like a cathedral of trees. Originally this piece was planned as a showcase of the background painter's art, and it was experimental for the studio. It involved many cross dissolves by the mystical quality of the Ave Maria drawings. Here we have Kai Nielsen's design again. Kai Nielsen happened to come to the Disney studio at this particular time because he was in rather dire straits. Nielsen later created murals while in this country, but his era of making elaborately illustrated books had passed, and so he had a very difficult time making a living here, and in fact he died destitute. He worked one more time, briefly, for the Disney studio, and that was, I think, around 56 or 57, just before he died, and he was working on some preliminary drawings for Sleeping Beauty.
I can't wait to learn
more about desire for this particular section was to see it like a spectacle on a stage. Not too literally said, but he wanted a bigness to it, and it always seemed to me like the Easter pageant at Radio City Music Hall. It has that sort of big stage quality to it. The procession of the faithful and the nuns through the forest, which it looks like a cathedral of trees. Originally this piece was planned as a showcase of the background painter's art, and it was experimental for the studio. It involved many cross dissolves within the camera, and it was a challenge for the Technicolor people to maintain the quality of the color and the consistency and the density of it throughout. The Ave Maria was one of the most extensive uses of the multiplane camera. It was a special horizontal camera that they devised for this. More than 11,200 feet of film were shot in Fantasia, and 3,500 feet were multiplane, which was more than Snow White and Pinocchio combined. The multiplane camera gave an illusion of three-dimensionality to the backgrounds particularly. Characters could look like they were actually going through sets in a dimensional way. The final scene in the Ave Maria and the final scene in Fantasia is 217 feet. It's the longest scene in an animated film up to that time.
You can imagine in those days, of course, we made one mistake.
Thank you. Welcome back. Press the blue forward button.
Multiplane scene. There was no way to fix it. You had to go back and just start it over.
There were problems with the inking and painting of these figures as they moved along. The closest drawings, tiny little figures, and the pencil lines were very small, very thin, and Walt looked at the first stuff, completely inked and painted, and said, quotes, "It's a lousy job. We can't use it. Both the figures and the light." By the mystical quality of the Ave Maria drawings. Here we have Kai Nielsen's design again. Kai Nielsen happened to come to the Disney studio at this particular time because he was in rather dire straits. Nielsen later created murals while in this country, but his era of making elaborately illustrated books had passed, and so he had a very difficult time making a living here, and in fact he died destitute. He worked one more time, briefly, for the Disney studio, and that was, I think, around 56 or 57, just before he died, and he was working on some preliminary drawings for Sleeping Beauty. And Walt's desire for this particular section was to see it like a spectacle on a stage. Not too literally said, but he wanted a bigness to it, and it always seemed to me like the Easter pageant at Radio City Music Hall. It has that sort of big stage quality to it. The procession of the faithful and the nuns through the forest, which it looks like a cathedral of trees. Originally, this piece was planned as a showcase of the background painter's art, and it was experimental for the studio. It involved many cross dissolves within the camera, and it was a challenge for the Technicolor people to maintain the quality of the color and the consistency and the density of it throughout. The Ave Maria was one of the most extensive uses of the multiplane camera. It was a special horizontal camera that they devised for this. More than 11,200 feet of film were shot in Fantasia, and 3,500 feet were multiplane, which was more than Snow White and Pinocchio combined. The multiplane camera gave it an illusion of three-dimensionality to the backgrounds particularly. Characters could look like they were actually going through sets in a dimensional way. The final scene in the Ave Maria and the final scene in Fantasia is 217 feet. It's the longest scene in an animated film up to that time.
You can imagine in those days, of course, we made one mistake in the middle of, or even at the end of a multiplane scene. There was no way to fix it. You had to go back and just start it over.
There were problems with the inking and painting of these figures as they moved along there. The closest drawings
it over. Back and just start it over. There was no way to fix it. You had to go back and just start it over. You had to go back and just start it over.
bigness to it, and it always seemed by the mystical quality of the Ave Maria drawings. Here we have Kai Nielsen's design again. Kai Nielsen happened to come to the Disney studio at this particular time because he was in rather dire straits. Nielsen later created murals while in this country, but his era of making elaborately illustrated books had passed, and so he had a very difficult time making a living here, and in fact he died destitute. He worked one more time, briefly, for the Disney studio, and that was, I think, around 56 or 57, just before he died, and he was working on some preliminary drawings for Sleeping Beauty. And Walt's desire for this particular section was to see it like a spectacle on a stage. Not too literally said, but he wanted a bigness to it, and it always seemed to me like the Easter pageant at Radio City Music Hall. It has that sort of big stage quality to it. The procession of the faithful and the nuns through the forest, which it looks like a cathedral of trees. Originally this piece was planned as a showcase of the background painter's art, and it was experimental for his era of making elaborately illustrated books had passed in rather dire straits. Nielsen later created murals while in this country. He was in rather dire straits. Nielsen later come to the Disney studio at this particular time because he was in rather dire straits. This particular time because he was in rather Disney studio at this particular time because he was in rather. We have Kai Nielsen's design again.
I'd like to thank James Levant.
By the mystical quality of Maria drawings. Here we have Kai Nielsen's design again, by the mystical quality of the Ave Maria drawings. Here we have Kai Nielsen's design again. Kai Nielsen happened to come to the Disney studio at this particular time because he was in rather dire straits. Nielsen later created murals while in this country, but his era of making elaborately illustrated books had passed, and so he had a very difficult time making a living here, and in fact he died destitute. He worked one more time, briefly, for the Disney studio, and that was, I think, around 56 or 57, just before he died, and he was working on some
Typical Amateri.
layout man.
One like Beethoven's Pastoral, a work of several movements. We often imagined symphonic music is very often imagined. Very often imagined music. Symphonic music is very often imagined works, but symphonic music is very often imagined to be a kind of, well, as Deems Taylor said, music for its own sake. Kind of, well, as Deems Taylor said, music for its own sake. To take a symphony, said music for its own sake. To be a kind music is very often imagined. Is very often imagined to be a kind of, well, as Deems Taylor said, music for its own sake. To take a symphony, which is after all a work of several movements, to even take one like Beethoven's Pastoral, which is illustrative to some degree, and then animate it with one's own imagination and not necessarily an attempt to recreate what Beethoven may have imagination and not necessarily an attempt to and then animate it with one's own imagination illustrative to some degree and then animate it with one's own imagination animate it with one's own imagination is illustrative to some degree. Symphonic music is very often imagined. Symphonic music is very often imagined to be a kind of, well, as Deems Taylor said, music for its own sake. To take a symphony, which is after all a work of several movements, to even take one like Beethoven's Pastoral, which is illustrative to some degree, and then animate it with one's own imagination and not necessarily an attempt to recreate what Beethoven may have visualized. I think, thank God it's there, because just as we did in Fantasia 2000 with the first movement of the Fifth Symphony, I think the music itself is so sensational that it must capture the imaginations of young people and cause them to go to a record store or go to a concert or go to some place where they can encounter the entire piece. And I think it would have been a pity not to use it just because capture the several movements to even
Well, as James Taylor said, music for its works. But symphonic music is very often imagined. When I listened to music as a little kid,
Brutus and Melinda, quite familiar with each other now. There's a wonderful layout by Ken Anderson. There's a wonderful layout by Ken Anderson. There's a wonderful layout by Ken Anderson. Such. Became as someone that the studio described almost like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day balloon rather than a more youthful. I love these wine glasses that never turn. Became as someone, the depiction of Vulcan and Bacchus became much more cartoony in the final film. In fact, the Bacchanal sequence Time magazine described as Olympus in diapers. In a meeting with Stokowski in 1939, Walt described the ending he was planning for the Pastoral.
What?
In a meeting with Stokowski in 1939, Walt described the ending he was planning for the Pastoral.
Well, everybody's having a swell time, and suddenly
Described the ending he
was over the whole hillside. You've got this cloud throwing a shadow. It's a beautiful effect, showing the sunbeams put out by a cloud. It changes everything and stops the whole dance. Cloud throwing a
particular piece in terms of the final design. The original concept sketches are much more interesting than what finally ended up. Say, for example, the centaurs. They were much more virile in the concept sketches by James Potrero, and the depiction of Vulcan and Bacchus became much more cartoony in the final film. In fact, the Bacchanal sequence Time magazine described as Olympus in diapers. In a meeting with Stokowski, the original concept sketches are much more
Well, that naturally led to others in color. From then on, all of the Silly 70s went in color. I only contracted for that one series in color.
To create the Pogo comp.
It just goes with my red party dress. It just goes with my red party dress. The bracelet. It just goes with my red party dress. It just goes with my red party dress. It just goes with my red party dress. Thank you, party dress. It just goes with my red party dress. It just goes with my red party dress. It just goes with my red party dress. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. How about a fashion show? So nice and oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. How about a so nice and dressed up? Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. How about a fashion show? So nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. How about oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up. Oh my goodness, you all look so nice and dressed up today. How about a fashion show?
That's a great idea. Sally, you go first.
Okay, here it goes. There were some things
Everybody.
How about a fashion show?
Everybody. Dress up. Everybody.
How about a fashion show?
That's a great idea. Sally, you go first.
Okay, here it goes.
Ooh.